The final topic, the final presentation is going to be from very Reverend Richard Janowicz, and he is the pastor of Nativity of the Mother of God Parish in Springfield, Oregon, and his presentation is on koinonia, the church as a community. Father Richard?
Slava Isusu Christu.
Slava Naviki.
I'm working on this. Okay, good. I hope that you see that screen. My topic is koinonia, spilnota, fellowship, community. In the Acts of the Apostles, in the 2nd chapter, St. Luke writes about the early community of the church, and he says, they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of the bread and to prayer. There's nothing new there about that fellowship part because Jesus had a fellowship. He had a community that was with him during the time that he was preaching and teaching. St. Paul often addresses the way that the early Christians were treating one another as community when in the cities that he was serving. For example, he writes to the people in Corinth, he says, don't mock other people who are afraid to eat meat because it's been sacrificed to idols. Don't practice immorality. Don't divide into groups and have different leaders and say, you belong to this one, you belong to that one. Stop suing one another in the pagan courts. And on. So many things he writes about the way people were treating one another in community. But he also writes to them not about just what they shouldn't do, but what they should do. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, St. Paul writes, and you've heard this many times, love is patient, love is kind. It is not jealous, it is not pompous, it is not rude. Now, St. Paul isn't writing that just so Roman Catholics have something to read at wedding services. He meant that's how the Christians of Corinth were supposed to treat one another. This is how, not husband and wife just, but Christians in the community were meant to treat one another according to this. He also writes, I urge you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree in what you say, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and in the same purpose. We live in times today where our faith is being tested and abused more and more with every passing year. So more than ever, we need to be, like St. Paul said, united in the same mind and in the same purpose. The parish should be a place where all the members of that parish can find fellowship. Fellowship, first of all, with God, and then fellowship with each other. In this fellowship, then, faith is strengthened, and we can go back out into the world having strengthened and having been strengthened in our faith. Bishop Benedict has said many times that we need this koinonia, this fellowship, because we are stronger and better when we stand together than we are if we stand alone. And that sounds like common sense, but I think there are times where people don't always see the true value of fellowship in parish life. Sometimes people look at the church as the kind of spiritual dispensary or kind of a spiritual store. You go to church to get stuff. You go to get communion, you go to get married, you go to get buried, you go to confession, you get stuff when you go to church. Not really to build a fellowship with my fellow parishioners. But that's not the model we read about in the New Testament. That's not the model for parish life, and that's not the model for parish life that our Lord gave to us. When we come together to pray, we are forming community. We are worshiping as a community, but not just at liturgy. We're forming community. We can be forming community at other services as well, not just liturgy, not just Vespers, but at funerals, at weddings, at baptisms. We often have other parishioners that show up to these services when people are receiving the sacraments. Not because they were invited. You don't need an invitation to come to church for a wedding. You need an invitation if you want to eat afterwards, but you don't need an invitation to come to church for a wedding. These are public services. And when other parishioners come to pray at these other services, they are creating a stronger community. Okay, so we don't have open confession. You can do that by yourself. On Sundays, as many of our parishes have, coffee and food after liturgy. Many of our parishes do this. And it's one of the best ways for people to get to know one another at church. Many, many people find so much goodness in just sitting down, eating and drinking with one another and learning about one another's lives. A lot of business gets done between parishioners when they come together at the coffee social. A lot of charitable work gets done. A lot of help gets done. A lot of understanding gets done. On other days, there are other things that can help to form community. For example, Bible studies. We have 2 Bible studies every week, Monday night and Wednesday morning. And probably 6 to 12 people show up at each of those Bible studies. And it's a way to share faith in a different way. Another example is on Friday, after pre-sanctified liturgy on Friday, people sign up. We have a soup supper, fasting soup and bread. And then afterwards, there's a 15-minute maybe talk by me, something educational. I went to Ukraine a few years ago, and I was able to show pictures and the people and the churches, the shrines of Ukraine. And it was a really good way for our parishioners, not just to form community one another being there, but also with people who are in a different country and are part of our church. Working together is a great way to create community. So if our Sunday coffee, 2 families come and bring every week something to eat. People volunteer for church cleaning. We could hire somebody to do it. But I think it's so much better for our community when people themselves come to do the cleaning and they give themselves in that way to their church community. Bingo. We had bingo for many years. We get maybe 8 to 10 people working at bingo every year, and they're not just working for the church, they're also working with one another. Repair projects, preparing food for different events, all ways to bring people together in work. The pastor. He should work alongside the parishioners as much as it's possible to do, I think. So I take my turn at cleaning, I take my turn at the coffee social. Because we're one parish, pastor and people, we need to support one another. And the pastor needs to spend time with his people. Sponsoring events. So we've had things like the Oregon Slavonic Choir that was for 5 or 6 years that they were singing. We have a Ukrainian dance troupe, 80 children and young adults. And they perform at our annual festival on Ukrainian Day. One celebration, we had the Millennium Celebration in 1988. Every day we had different services at local Roman Catholic parishes, which helped make our parish known. And it made us known among the Roman Catholic parishes in our area. One of the Roman Catholic priests told us somebody one time, he says, yeah, that church, they're like 85% Catholic. So we had services at their church to prove we were 100% Catholic. And I think the reason how these events, it's not just about people working these events, it's working together, but it's also showing what we have with the community. Sometimes the events can be seen just as fundraisers. We have this thing to raise money, we have that thing to raise money. But I think more importantly than fundraisers sometimes are the ways in which these events show our parish to the outside world. I think a parish that's closed in on itself is a parish that's not going to be happy for too long. Invitation. If you want something good, if you believe your parish is a good place, don't you want other people to share in that goodness? You know, sometimes it just takes an invitation. Why don't you come to church with me? Meet me at church. You know, I'll come with you inside and we can sit together. This is another way to build community. We cannot be closed in. We should always be seeking to bring other people to the gospel of Christ and to our parish. And once they're in the church, you know, Father Andriy spoke about this, make visitors feel welcome. And how many times, it's almost a standard line I've heard over many years, where somebody went to a Ukrainian church and people said to them, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Or another thing is to pretend they're invisible. Just look right through them. Don't say hello. Language issues, and Father Andriy was talking about this. And I know it's a difficult question to answer because every parish has their own particular situation. Every parish has different needs. Every parish needs to take their own approach to it. But I do wonder, if you have a smaller parish and you're having two different liturgies that are based on language, are you not making two separate communities small ones instead of one community that's much stronger? Because when you have two liturgies, and even if it wasn't based just on language, even if it was two liturgies in a small parish, you're still creating two communities. People who will rarely see each other, people who will rarely mix with each other. So I really think it's not a good idea to have two liturgies in smaller parishes, because one stronger parish is better. And as Father Andriy said, people need to be able to compromise with one another. That's also an important element of community life. And I think this is a good question to ask. Would my children and my grandchildren and their spouses, would they want to belong to this community? Would they want to belong to this parish? Or is the way that I'm seeing and the way that I'm acting, the way that I'm relating to my parish, is it just all about me and not about also trying to prepare for the days that are ahead? It's not always easy, community life. People have their faults and weaknesses, and a lot of people have more than I do. But if parishioners learn how to better accept one another, they learn how to find more good than faults in their pew neighbors, it brings grace into the parish and it brings life into the parish. Community life is not always easy. And sometimes it seems it is about cantors. We have great cantors. But I had a situation one time, we were at the coffee social after liturgy, and our cantor, who is a very dedicated man, very dedicated cantor, he came up to me and he said, I quit. I can't believe what I just heard. And I said, well, what? What did you hear? I'm not going to say. I'm just not even going to say. Well, who said it? I'm not going to say. But I'm leaving. We're leaving. So he left with his whole family, and his brother and his family were also irate about this situation, and they also left. So now we've got two families that are no longer coming to church, and both of them were from my hometown in Ohio, both of them. But later on, because his wife, the one man, his wife became sick, he asked me to come and see his wife in her illness and to anoint her, and I did. When she died, he asked if we would have the funeral, and I did. And then he came back to church because of that. But community isn't always easy. So koinonia was not always shining in St. Paul's time, or he wouldn't be writing all those things in his letters. And say today too, our community life isn't always shining. But if we choose to try and continue to help, if we encourage and if we love one another as best as we can, then Christ is among us. Christos posered nas. And I thought maybe these are two questions that might be good for discussion. What is good about the community life in our parish, and how can we improve that? And the second question, What are the things that we should try and change in our community life that are not so good for us? And how do we go about doing that? Thank you, everyone.